The Communist Revolution in China was a conflict that started just before World War II and in its wake was one of the bloodiest conflicts in Chinese history. That conflict led to the industrial powerhouse of China that we know today. For a long while there is much civil unrest in China causing the empire to dissolve into squabbling warlords. One of the strongest warlord groups was a political party we will call the Nationalists. They were the original warlords to overthrow the emperor. Together with the communists, they took control of most of China, but tension was brewing. Soon, the nationalists had double-crossed the communists, forcing them to resort to the Long March in 1935. They marched from southern China all the way up to the province of Shaanxi. The nationalists now held power in most of China. Now, who was around and leading each party that was a part of this, you may ask?
Yeah. Well, so in the very early years, when the Communist Party was founded in 1921, and so in the 20s and into the early 30s, up to the point of the Long March, which took place in 1933-34, up to that point, Mao was not the undisputed leader yet of the Chinese Communist Party. He really only started taking that mantle on over the course of the Long March. And there were other people who were engaged, like Chu Qiubai is somebody, or Chen Guoda, people who were engaged in the early the development of the party.
The nationalists at this time were led by Sun Yat-sen and then Chiang Kai-shek. The Japanese were led by a man named Hirohito. Joseph Stalin was the leader of the Russian communists, who allied themselves with Mao. In the middle of the Long March, Japan starts to gradually occupy more and more of China. The nationalists and the communists signed a sort of treaty to compromise and fight Japan. When the Sino-Japanese War ended, the nationalists and the communists went back to fighting each other for control of China. And with the help of the Warsaw Pact, which is the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc countries, they won the war and with the treaty compromised to exile the nationalists to Taiwan, and the communists got all of mainland China. Mao didn't know how a world without conflict could be a good thing, because in a revolution people are willing to make sacrifices for their country that a person in peacetime would have never considered doing. To him, that called for a perpetual revolution. The Great Leap Forward was meant to transform China into an industrialized socialist nation, but instead led to food shortages and the death of between 15 and 45 million people. This loosened Mao's grasp on the populace, so on May 16, 1966, he launched the Cultural Revolution. It was a movement within China that attempted to replace traditional cultural elements with Maoism, a form of Marxism.
But one thing Mao really did like was revolution, and this idea of which is actually a Trotskyite idea, so it comes from the Soviet Union, but he really held on to it, the idea of continuous revolution, of revolution not really ending, right? So one of the things about the Cultural Revolution is, who were the main kind of actors of the Cultural Revolution? It was people your age, right? A little bit older than you, maybe, but so middle school and high school students, they were the people who enacted the Cultural Revolution. Well, most of them, if we're talking about 1966, 67, right? Most of them hadn't even been born at the time of the Chinese Revolution. So they had no revolutionary experience at all. But Mao felt they needed it. And so that's one reason why he mobilized this population of young people to enact this event.
In August, Mao's goals for China were to eliminate religion and education. Mao believed those were his biggest threats to power. Children from middle school to college began to form the Red Guard in the summer of 1966. He shut down schools and encouraged them to join the revolution. Mao encouraged them to attack the four olds: customs, culture, habits, and ideas. For the next 2 months they robbed homes and destroyed books, art, magazines, religious institutions, and artifacts. People were being taken away from whatever government or religion they believed in, whether via force or acceptingly. Despite the change in power, most people kept their jobs and businesses. This was a hard time for most people, but it ultimately ended when Mao died of a heart attack at 83 years old in September of 1976. Even after Mao's death, China still rules as one of the most communist and powerful nations in the world, having many products made there and everyone having equal pay.
I would say it actually probably made it a little more stable. Partly because in the last 10 or even 20 years of Mao's life, he had been guiding China through a series of kind of mini revolutions.
There's no way to tell the impact, but China has a better economy than during the revolution, and China has established a navy.
In some ways, it's a little hard to answer that question because in some ways it kind of asks you to think about a counterfactual possibility of a China that didn't have the communist revolution, and we don't know what that would have been like. But what we do know is that although the communist revolution was really hard on China in a lot of ways, particularly with those big mass movements in which a lot of people suffered, on the other hand, under communist leadership, China's economy has improved enormously and grown enormously. I mean, China went from being in the 1940s or 50s, really a third world developing economy, right? Barely developing economy, to becoming the economic leader that it is now.